The sky above the battlefield was an eerie shade of green, marbled with darker streaks that churned like ink spilled into water. The air was thick with the acrid scent of scorched metal and something else, something alive that had been burned away in the chaos. Captain Elias Varr stood at the edge of a blackened ridge, his boots sinking slightly into the glassy soil, which still radiated faint heat. Below him, the ground fell into a jagged crater, littered with the debris of what had once been an advanced alien outpost. The silence was oppressive. No more screams, no more detonations. Only the occasional crackle of cooling wreckage broke the stillness, and even that felt like an intrusion. Elias adjusted his helmet, the HUD flickering faintly with warnings of residual radiation levels. His breathing, filtered and measured by the suit's systems, felt too loud in his ears. This wasn't just an ambush, he muttered, his voice swallowed by the empty expanse. It was a slaughter. The comms in his helmet hissed before a voice came through, brittle and faint. "Say again, Varr. Your signal's weak." "Nothing, Lieutenant," Elias replied, his tone clipped. "Just thinking out loud." He cut the channel before the man on the other end could press him further. He didn't need anyone listening to his doubts. Not out here, where the line between sanity and despair was razor thin. Elias scanned the crater once more, his gaze drawn to something unusual, a faint glimmer in the shadows at the center of the destruction. It wasn't the dull, fragmented reflection of shattered machinery. It was softer, almost organic. Against his better judgment, he began his descent, his movements cautious but deliberate. The suit's servos whined faintly with each step, but he paid them no mind. As he neared the source of the glimmer, the details became clearer. It wasn't a trick of the light. A figure lay crumpled amidst the wreckage, her form partially obscured by shards of alien architecture. She was unlike anything he had seen before. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and faint veins of gold pulsed beneath the surface with a rhythm that suggested life, though barely. A delicate, geometric pattern was etched into her forehead, glimmering faintly in the dim light. Her limbs were slender, almost fragile, and her attire, a flowing, iridescent material, was torn and singed, clinging to her as though it had been grown, not stitched. Elias crouched beside her, his instincts warring with his training. Every protocol screamed for him to leave her, to report her presence to command and let them decide. But his gut, the same gut that had kept him alive through countless skirmishes, told him she was no threat. At least, not right now. Her eyes fluttered open, and Elias froze. They weren't eyes in the human sense, but orbs of shifting color, as if entire galaxies had been compressed into twin spheres. Her gaze locked onto his, and he felt an inexplicable pull, as though her very being demanded his attention. "Help. Me," she whispered, her voice weak but resonant, carrying a weight that belied her frail appearance. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. He glanced at the wound on her side, a deep gash leaking a viscous golden fluid that shimmered unnaturally. Whatever she was, her physiology wasn't human. The medkits designed for his squad wouldn't work on her, but his blood— "No," he muttered, shaking his head. The thought was insane. Her hand, delicate but firm, grasped his wrist. He hadn't even seen her move. Her touch was cold, almost electric, and he felt a strange sensation ripple through him, an echo of something he couldn't quite place. "Please," she repeated, her voice barely audible. Elias clenched his jaw. If he left her, she'd die here. That much was certain, and for reasons he couldn't explain, the thought of her death felt wrong, not just morally, but on some deeper level he couldn't articulate. "Damn it," he growled, pulling a small syringe from his belt. The process was crude, improvised. He extracted a small amount of his own blood and injected it directly into a vein near her wound. The effect was immediate. Her body convulsed, and a faint golden light began to spread from the wound, tracing her veins like liquid fire. Elias stumbled back, his breathing ragged as he watched the transformation. The light grew brighter, enveloping her entirely. For a moment he thought he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd triggered some catastrophic reaction. But then the light dimmed, and she sat up, her movements slow and deliberate. "You," she began, her voice now stronger, tinged with a strange melodic quality. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "You have done something profound." Elias staggered to his feet, feeling an odd dizziness creeping over him. "You're welcome, I guess," he muttered, trying to mask his unease with sarcasm. "What's your name?" She tilted her head, as if the question were foreign to her. "Xylera," she said finally, the name rolling off her tongue like a song. Elias nodded, but before he could respond, his comm crackled again. The lieutenant's voice urgent. "VAR, we've got incoming. Unknown signatures heading your way. ETA 2 minutes. Elias swore under his breath. He glanced at Xylera, who was now standing, her movements fluid and graceful despite her recent injuries. "Can you move?" She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I can move, thanks to you." "Good," Elias said, already turning to scramble back up the ridge. "Because if we don't get out of here, neither of us is going to live long enough to regret this." As they climbed, the faint hum of approaching ships grew louder, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The air within the shuttle was thick with tension as Captain Elias Var guided it through the jagged canyons of the ravaged planet. A thin film of condensation streaked across the cockpit's windshield, distorting the fiery green horizon. Every so often, the faint hum of pursuing ships sent a spike of adrenaline through Elias's veins, though he couldn't see them yet. "Strap in," Elias muttered, his voice clipped as he risked a glance toward his unexpected passenger. Xylera sat in the co-pilot's seat, her movements unnervingly calm as she fastened the harness across her chest. Her translucent skin had regained its luminous quality, veins of gold pulsing faintly in rhythm with her breath. Though her injuries had mostly healed, her presence felt alien in a way that made the small cockpit seem suffocating. "Who are they?" Elias asked, his voice tight. "The ones chasing us?" Xylera tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of a smile curving her lips. "Not your concern," she replied, her tone calm yet dismissive. Elias slammed a fist against the console, the metal panel rattling under the force. "Not my concern. Lady, I just bled for you. If someone's trying to kill us, I'd like to know why." She regarded him for a long moment, her galaxy-filled eyes narrowing slightly. "They are hunters," she said finally, "sent by those who wish to control what they do not understand, and now they will come for you too." Elias gritted his teeth and turned his focus back to the controls. The shuttle's thrusters groaned as he forced the craft through a narrow canyon, hugging the wall so closely that the ship's warning systems blared in protest. The comm crackled again, though this time it wasn't the familiar voice of his lieutenant. Instead, a garbled transmission filled the cockpit, laced with static and incomprehensible clicks. Xylera's expression shifted instantly, her calm demeanor giving way to a sharp tension. "They've locked onto us," she said, her voice low but steady. Elias's fingers flew across the controls, activating the shuttle's countermeasures. A burst of flares shot from the rear of the craft, illuminating the canyon walls in a staccato of orange and white. Moments later, a deafening explosion rocked the ship as one of the pursuer's missiles struck the flares instead of its target. "They're not giving up," Elias muttered, his heart pounding. "No," Xylera agreed, her voice almost a whisper. "They won't." The chase ended hours later, after Elias managed to slip the shuttle into a labyrinth of caves hidden within the planet's northern ice fields. The caves were cold, their walls glittering with frost and strange mineral deposits that caught the faint light of the shuttle's running lamps. The oppressive quiet of the place was broken only by the distant rumble of shifting ice. Elias stepped out into the cavern, his breath fogging the air as he scanned the surroundings. The shuttle sat nestled against a jagged outcropping of ice, its hull scorched and dented from the escape. Xylera followed silently, her movements impossibly fluid for someone who had been at death's door just hours earlier. "We'll be safe here," Elias said, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. Xylera didn't respond. Instead, she knelt beside a frozen pool of water near the cavern wall, her fingertips tracing intricate patterns across its surface. As she moved, the gold veins in her skin seemed to glow brighter, casting a soft, ethereal light across the ice. "What are you doing?" Elias asked, crossing his arms. "Listening," she replied simply. "To what?" "The planet." Elias opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was something about the way she spoke, calm, assured, that made him pause. He watched as the ice beneath her hand began to shift, forming faint, intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. "This place remembers," Xylera murmured, her gaze fixed on the shifting patterns. "It has seen many things, and it will see many more." Elias frowned, unsure how to respond. Instead, he turned his attention to the shuttle, running a quick diagnostic on the ship's systems. The readings weren't good. Half the systems were running on auxiliary power, and the main thrusters were barely functional. "We're not going anywhere until I can repair the thrusters," he said, more to himself than to Xylera. She stood and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Then we will wait," she said, her tone as calm as ever. Hours passed in tense silence as Elias worked on the shuttle. The cavern's frigid air bit at his exposed hands, but he pushed through, his movements mechanical as he replaced damaged components and rerouted power to the critical systems. Xylera watched him in silence, her gaze steady and unyielding. Elias could feel her eyes on him, and it made his skin crawl. "Do you always stare at people like that?" he asked finally, not looking up from his work. "You are fascinating," she replied, the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "Yeah, well, don't get used to it," Elias muttered. "I'm not exactly a people person." "No," Xylera agreed, her tone thoughtful, "but you are something else entirely." Before Elias could respond, the shuttle's sensors began to beep softly, drawing his attention to the console. The display showed faint energy signatures approaching the cavern, too faint to be ships, but not natural either. "We've got company," he said, his voice low. Xylera moved to his side, her expression suddenly serious. "They have found us." "How?" "They always find what they seek," she replied, her voice tinged with an edge of something Elias couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or anger. Elias grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder, his muscles tensing as he prepared for whatever was coming. He turned to Xylera, his expression grim. "If we're going to survive this," he said, "you're going to have to start telling me the truth." Xylera met his gaze, her golden eyes burning with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see straight through him. "The truth," she said softly, "is not something you are ready to hear." Before Elias could press her further, the faint hum of approaching footsteps echoed through the cavern, and he knew their time had run out. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the cavern, distorted by the jagged walls of ice. At first, Elias thought it might be the natural creaking and groaning of the glacier, shifting under its own weight, but the rhythm was unmistakably deliberate. The sound wasn't coming from one pair of feet, it was many. He exchanged a glance with Xylera, whose golden eyes were narrowed, scanning the darkness beyond the shuttle's lights. Her composure, so steady and unreadable before, now carried a thread of taut vigilance. Elias's pulse quickened. He tightened his grip on the rifle slung across his chest and moved toward the cavern's entrance. He kept his movements slow, deliberate, stepping carefully to avoid crunching the frost-covered ground. "They are closer than I expected," Xylera murmured, her voice soft but edged with tension. Elias glanced at her, a sharp question forming on his lips, but the faint glimmer of golden light in her veins drew his focus instead. The soft glow pulsed faintly with her every breath, casting eerie reflections against the icy walls. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Elias asked, his voice low. Xylera didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, listening intently to the echoing footsteps. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Elias's chest tighten. "They are harvesters," she said. "Agents of those who hunt my kind. Their purpose is to capture, dissect, and extract." "Extract what?" She turned her gaze to him, her expression grave. "Everything. Knowledge, essence, life." A shiver ran down Elias's spine. He didn't need more details to understand the stakes. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by faint mechanical whirs. Elias motioned for Xylera to take cover behind the shuttle while he crouched near a jagged outcropping of ice. His rifle was steady in his hands, its muzzle pointed toward the cavern's entrance. The first figure emerged from the shadows, tall and humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Its body was encased in sleek black armor that absorbed the dim light, rendering it almost invisible. Its helmeted head swiveled slowly, scanning the cavern with a glowing crimson visor. Behind it, more figures appeared, each identical to the first. They moved with eerie precision, their footsteps synchronized, their weapons held at the ready. Elias held his breath, his finger hovering over the trigger. He counted 6 of them, each one a perfect model of mechanical efficiency. "Do not engage them," Xylera whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias shot her a look over his shoulder. "And what's your plan? Wait until they dissect us?" "They will not harm me," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "You, however, are expendable." "Comforting," Elias muttered, his grip tightening on the rifle. The lead harvester raised a hand, signaling the others to spread out. They moved like shadows, their armor blending seamlessly with the cavern's dim surroundings. One of them stopped near the shuttle, its visor scanning the vessel's exterior. Elias's heart pounded as he watched the figure. His mind raced through possible scenarios, but each one ended with the same grim conclusion. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. Xylera stepped out from behind the shuttle, her movements slow and deliberate. The faint glow of her veins seemed to intensify, casting an ethereal light that drew the attention of every harvester in the cavern. "What are you doing?" Elias hissed, his voice sharp with panic. "Ending this," she replied, her gaze fixed on the harvesters. The lead harvester turned toward her, its weapon lowering slightly as it scanned her. A distorted voice emanated from its helmet, a guttural combination of clicks and tones that Elias couldn't understand. Xylera responded in kind, her own voice shifting into a series of melodic tones and sharp clicks. The exchange lasted only a few moments, but it was enough to make Elias feel like an outsider in his own fight. The harvesters hesitated, their synchronized movements faltering for the first time. The lead figure took a step closer to Xylera, its visor glowing brighter as it scanned her more intently. Elias's instincts screamed at him to act, but something about Xylera's demeanor held him back. She stood tall, her expression calm but commanding, as if she were in complete control. Then, without warning, the lead harvester raised its weapon and fired. A searing beam of energy shot toward Xylera, but before it could reach her, the golden light in her veins flared brilliantly. The beam struck an invisible barrier around her, dissipating harmlessly into the air. The harvesters reacted instantly, raising their weapons and firing in unison. The cavern filled with the deafening roar of energy weapons, but Xylera remained untouched, her glowing aura repelling every attack. Elias didn't waste the opportunity. He sprang from his hiding spot, his rifle barking as he fired at the nearest harvester. The armor-piercing rounds punched through the figure's sleek exterior, sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. The remaining harvesters turned their attention to Elias, their weapons pivoting toward him with mechanical precision. "Move!" Xylera shouted, her voice carrying a commanding authority that sent a jolt through Elias. He dove behind another outcropping of ice as a volley of energy beams scorched the ground where he had just stood. Xylera raised her hands, the golden light in her veins surging outward in a wave of energy that rippled through the cavern. The harvesters staggered, their movements faltering as the energy disrupted their systems. Elias seized the moment, firing at another harvester and taking it down with a well-placed shot. The remaining figures began to retreat, their movements no longer synchronized. Xylera advanced on them, her glowing aura radiating a sense of unrelenting power. As the last harvester fell, the cavern fell silent once more, the only sound the faint hum of Xylera's aura fading into stillness. Elias lowered his rifle, his breath ragged as he surveyed the scene. The fallen harvesters lay scattered across the cavern floor, their once imposing forms now lifeless. Xylera turned to him, her expression unreadable. "They will send more," she said simply. Elias nodded, his grip on the rifle tightening. "Then we'd better be ready." For the first time, he felt the weight of what he had become involved in, a conflict far larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The stakes were no longer just about survival. They were about something far greater, something he was only beginning to understand. The aftermath of the battle left the cavern in eerie silence, the scent of scorched metal mingling with the crisp tang of glacial air. The fallen harvesters lay sprawled across the icy floor, their black armor glinting faintly in the dim light. Elias leaned against the jagged wall, catching his breath, his rifle still clutched in his trembling hands. Xylera stood a few feet away, her golden veins dimming, as the light within her faded to a faint shimmer. Her composure remained unshaken, but Elias noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she stared at the lifeless forms before them. "They won't stop," Elias said, his voice hoarse. "They never do," Xylera replied, her tone as cold as the ice around them. Elias pushed himself upright, his mind racing. He had survived firefights before, but this was different. The precision, the relentlessness of the harvesters. It was unlike anything he'd faced on Earth. And Xylera, with her otherworldly aura and cryptic words, was a puzzle he couldn't begin to unravel. "What's their endgame?" he asked, stepping closer to her. Xylera didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crouched beside one of the fallen harvesters, her delicate fingers brushing over its cracked armor. She seemed to study it, her expression unreadable. "They serve a master," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "A mind so vast, so ancient, that it defies comprehension. These harvesters are merely extensions of its will." Elias frowned. "And you're on its hit list. Why?" Xylera hesitated, her golden eyes flickering with something Elias couldn't quite place, regret perhaps, or fear. "There are things I carry," she said, rising to her feet. "Memories, truths, secrets that were never meant to leave my world. To them, I am not a person. I am a vessel, a prize to be captured or destroyed." Elias opened his mouth to press further, but before he could speak, a soft hum filled the air. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder, resonating through the cavern like a low, vibrating pulse. Xylera's eyes widened. "We need to leave. Now." Elias didn't argue. He grabbed his gear and followed her as she darted toward the cavern's far end, her movements swift and purposeful. The hum grew louder, reverberating through the icy walls, and Elias realized it wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a pressure that seemed to push against his chest, making it harder to breathe. "What is that?" he asked, his voice strained. "They are not alone," Xylera said, glancing back at him. "The harvesters were only the beginning." They emerged into a narrow tunnel, its walls shimmering with frost. Xylera led the way, her glowing veins casting just enough light to guide them. The hum was deafening now, a relentless pulse that seemed to echo from all directions. As they reached a fork in the tunnel, Xylera stopped abruptly. She turned to Elias, her expression more serious than he'd ever seen. "Listen to me," she said. "No matter what happens, you must not hesitate. If I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand?" Elias's heart pounded in his chest. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Before she could answer, the tunnel walls began to tremble. Cracks splintered through the ice, sending shards cascading to the ground. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the tunnel, unlike anything Elias had ever heard. Xylera grabbed his arm. "Move!" They sprinted down the right path, the roar growing louder behind them. Elias risked a glance over his shoulder and felt his stomach drop. A massive shape was moving through the tunnel, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. It was unlike the harvesters, organic yet monstrous, its form shifting and undulating as it advanced. The hum that had filled the air seemed to emanate from it, a living pulse that made the walls quiver with its intensity. "What the hell is that?" Elias shouted. Xylera didn't answer. She led him through the twisting passageways, her movements sure and deliberate despite the chaos around them. The creature behind them was relentless, its roars shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Finally, they burst into a larger cavern, its ceiling high and studded with jagged icicles. In the center of the room stood a massive circular device, alien in design, its surface etched with glowing, intricate symbols. Xylera ran to the device, her hands moving over its surface with practiced ease. The symbols began to shift and rearrange, their light intensifying. "What are you doing?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with panic. "Opening a way out," Xylera said, "but it will take time." Elias turned back toward the tunnel they had just escaped. The creature was closer now, its form coming into focus. It was enormous, its body covered in glistening chitinous plates that shimmered with an unnatural iridescence. Its multiple eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its limbs ended in razor-sharp claws that scraped against the ice as it advanced. Elias raised his rifle, his hands steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." The creature let out another roar, its jaws opening to reveal rows of jagged, glistening teeth. It lunged forward, its massive body barreling through the cavern. Elias fired, the bullets striking its armored hide but doing little to slow it down. He gritted his teeth and kept firing, aiming for its glowing eyes. The creature shrieked as one of the bullets found its mark, but it didn't stop. It charged toward Elias, its claws outstretched. "Elias!" Xylera shouted. "Now!" Elias dove to the side just as the creature's claws slammed into the ground where he had been standing. He scrambled to his feet and ran toward Xylera, who stood beside the now-activated device. A swirling portal had formed in its center, its light casting strange, shifting shadows across the cavern. "Jump!" Xylera shouted. Elias didn't hesitate. He leaped into the portal, the world around him dissolving into blinding light. The last thing he heard was Xylera's voice, a mixture of urgency and resolve. "This is only the beginning." Elias hit the ground hard, his shoulders slamming into the frost-slick surface as the portal spat him out with a violent jolt. The air around him was different, heavier, tinged with a faint metallic taste that clung to his tongue and throat. For a moment, he lay still, his breaths ragged, his vision blurred by the residual light of the portal. "Get up!" Xylera's voice cut through the haze, sharp and commanding. He forced himself onto his hands and knees, the world around him slowly coming into focus. They were in a cavern unlike the one they'd fled, this one vast and cathedral-like, its walls carved with symbols that pulsed faintly, casting the space in an eerie glow. The air hummed with an unsettling energy, a low vibration that resonated in his chest. "What is this place?" he asked, rising unsteadily to his feet. Xylera didn't answer immediately. She stood a few paces ahead, her golden veins flickering erratically as she scanned the room with narrowed eyes. "A sanctuary," she said at last, though her tone carried no reassurance. Or at least it was. Elias frowned. "That's not exactly comforting." "It wasn't meant to be," she replied, her gaze locking onto something in the distance. Elias followed her line of sight. At the far end of the cavern stood an altar-like structure, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the walls. Above it, suspended in mid-air, was a crystalline sphere, its core swirling with faint tendrils of light. "What's that?" he asked, his voice low. Xylera didn't respond immediately. She took a cautious step forward, her expression unreadable. "It's a memory core," she said finally. "A fragment of what was lost." "Lost," Elias echoed, his brow furrowing. "My people," Xylera said, her voice tinged with a rare note of vulnerability. "This is all that remains of them, their knowledge, their essence, everything they were, preserved in fragments like this." Elias's gaze shifted between her and the sphere. "And the harvesters, your enemy, they're after it." "They're after me," Xylera said, her tone hardening. "I carry the keys to unlocking these fragments, to restoring what was taken. To them I am both a threat and a prize." Elias let out a low whistle. "No pressure, then." Before Xylera could respond, the hum in the air grew louder, the vibration intensifying. The symbols on the walls flickered, their light dimming and brightening in an erratic rhythm. "They found us," Xylera said, her voice tight. Elias raised his rifle, his grip tightening. "How? We went through the portal. Shouldn't that have thrown them off?" "It should have," Xylera said, her eyes narrowing. "But this place, it's not as secure as it once was. They've corrupted the pathways, bent them to their will. We're not safe here." As if to punctuate her words, the cavern trembled, a deep, resonant rumble that sent shards of ice cascading from the ceiling. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and the air seemed to ripple as a dark shape began to materialize near the portal they had just emerged from. Elias felt his stomach drop. The creature from the previous cavern, larger now, its form more distinct, was forcing its way through, its chitinous plates glinting in the pulsing light. "We can't fight that thing," he said, his voice edged with panic. "We won't," Xylera said, her gaze fixed on the memory core. "What are you—" Elias began, but Xylera cut him off. "Stay here," she said sharply, striding toward the altar. "Like hell I will," Elias shot back, moving to follow her. Before he could reach her, the creature let out a bone-chilling roar, its massive form fully emerging from the portal. It turned its glowing eyes toward them, its jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Elias raised his rifle and fired, the shots ringing out in rapid succession. The bullets struck the creature's armored hide, but as before, they barely left a mark. Xylera reached the altar, her hands moving over the surface with a fluid, practiced motion. The symbols responded to her touch, their light intensifying. The memory core began to pulse, its swirling tendrils of light growing more frantic. "Hurry up!" Elias shouted, his voice barely audible over the creature's deafening roars. The creature lunged toward him, its massive claws slamming into the ground where he had been standing moments before. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its attack, and fired again, aiming for its glowing eyes. Xylera's hand stilled, her eyes narrowing as the core's light coalesced into a single blinding pulse. The cavern was flooded with an intense golden glow, and the creature let out an ear-piercing shriek, recoiling as the light enveloped it. "What did you do?" Elias asked, his voice shaking. Xylera turned to him, her expression grim. "I activated the core. It won't destroy the creature, but it will buy us time." The light began to fade, and the creature, though weakened, still loomed ominously. "That's not enough," Elias said, his voice tight. "It's all we have," Xylera replied. She gestured toward a narrow passage that had been hidden in the shadows of the cavern. "That tunnel leads to another portal. It's our only chance." Elias hesitated, his gaze flickering between the creature and Xylera. "What about the core? Can't we take it with us?" Xylera shook her head. "It's anchored to this place. Moving it would destroy it, and everything it contains." The creature roared again, its glowing eyes locking onto them. "Go!" Xylera shouted, shoving Elias toward the tunnel. He stumbled but caught himself, glancing back at her. "What about you?" "I'll follow," she said, her voice firm. "Now move." Reluctantly, Elias turned and ran, the narrow passage swallowing him in its shadowy embrace. Behind him, the cavern trembled, the sounds of the creature's roars and Xylera's shouts echoing in his ears. As he sprinted through the tunnel, his mind raced. The stakes had never felt higher, the weight of Xylera's burden pressing heavily on him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. The mystery deepened, the danger escalated, and the path forward grew darker with every step. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, its walls narrow and jagged, forcing Elias to hunch as he moved. His breath was labored, his chest tightening with each step. The faint echoes of Zalira's voice and the creature's guttural roars seemed to follow him, amplified by the constricted space. He paused briefly, pressing a trembling hand against the icy wall, trying to steady his racing heart. What if she didn't make it? The thought clawed at his mind, more chilling than the cold air seeping through the rock. The golden glow of her veins as she had stood at the altar was seared into his memory, a stark contrast to the shadowy monstrosity that had loomed over her. Despite the overwhelming danger, she had faced it with unshakable resolve. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. I should have stayed. I should have fought. But the rational part of him knew better. He had seen how futile his weapons were against the creature. Staying would have meant dying alongside her, and for what? He had no answers, no solutions, nothing to give but his will to survive. The tunnel began to widen, its walls shimmering faintly with veins of bioluminescent crystal. The eerie glow illuminated his path, casting fragmented shadows that danced in unsettling patterns. The air was different here, denser, heavier with an unnameable energy. Elias's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he pressed on, driven by the faint hope that Zalira would catch up. Ahead, the passage opened into another cavern, smaller than the last, but no less foreboding. At its center was another altar-like structure, this one simpler in design, its surface etched with more of the glowing symbols. Above it hovered a circular portal, its edges crackling with unstable energy. Unlike the portal they had used earlier, this one pulsed erratically, as if struggling to maintain its form. Elias approached cautiously, his steps echoing in the cavern's silence. The portal's light cast strange, shifting patterns across the walls, creating an almost hypnotic effect. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing the edge of the altar. The instant his skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, sharp and electric. His vision blurred, and a cascade of images flooded his mind, fragments of a story he couldn't fully grasp. A planet bathed in golden light, towering spires reaching toward a violet sky. Zalira, younger, her face unlined by the weight of war. And then, fire. Chaos. The spires crumbled, the golden light dimmed, and shadowy figures descended like vultures, consuming everything in their path. Elias staggered back, his knees buckling. The visions receded, leaving him gasping for air. His pulse thundered in his ears, and for a moment, he felt as though the ground beneath him might collapse. Do you see now? The voice, soft but unmistakable, jolted him upright. He turned to see Zalira standing at the edge of the cavern, her golden veins dimmed but still glowing faintly. She was battered, her movements slow and deliberate, but she was alive. You made it, Elias said, relief flooding his voice. Barely, she replied, her tone weary. She gestured to the portal. But we're not safe yet. What is this place? He asked, his voice shaking. What did I just see? This is the threshold, Zalira said, stepping closer to the altar. A nexus point between what was and what is. The visions you saw, they were fragments of my people's history. Their fall. Elias frowned. Why would it show me that? Because you touched it, Zalira said simply. The threshold doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. It only reveals what lies beneath. Elias looked at her, his expression troubled. Is that why the harvesters want you? Because of what you know about this place? In part, Zalira admitted. She placed a hand on the altar, her expression grim. But it's more than that. The threshold holds the key to restoring what was lost, or destroying it forever. The harvesters want to ensure no one else can access it. Elias's gaze shifted to the portal, its unstable edges flickering ominously. And that thing back there, it's one of theirs? Zalira nodded. A sentinel, a guardian of sorts designed to protect the threshold from intruders. It's why we must move quickly. It won't stay weakened for long. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. What happens if we go through? Xylira's eyes met his, her expression unreadable. I don't know, she admitted. The portal is unstable. It could take us where we need to go, or it could tear us apart. Great, Elias muttered. So it's a gamble. Everything is, Xylira said softly. Before Elias could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, a low, rumbling vibration that grew steadily stronger. The portal's light flared, its edges sparking violently. It's coming, Xylira said, her voice tight. Elias turned toward the passage they had just come through. In the distance, he could hear the creature's guttural roars growing louder, its heavy footsteps shaking the earth. What do we do? He asked, his voice rising. Xylira stepped toward the portal, her expression resolute. We go through, she said. Elias stared at her, his heart pounding. You said it might kill us. It might, Xylira said, but staying here will. The creature's roar echoed through the cavern, closer now, its shadow looming at the edge of the passage. Elias, Xylira said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Trust me. He looked at her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Then, with a deep breath, he nodded. Let's do it, he said. Together, they stepped onto the altar, the portal's light enveloping them in a blinding glow. The last thing Elias heard before the world dissolved was the creature's enraged roar, its fury swallowed by the threshold's relentless pull. And then, silence. Elias woke to silence. For a long moment, he lay still, his senses dulled as though submerged underwater. Slowly, he became aware of a cool, soft surface beneath him, and the faint hum of energy coursing through the air. When he opened his eyes, he found himself staring at an endless expanse of light, a soft golden glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The ground beneath him shimmered like glass, reflecting a hazy version of himself. He sat up, his movement sluggish, and turned to find Xylira lying a few feet away, her chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Xylira, he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the luminous void. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a brief moment she looked disoriented. Then recognition dawned in her golden eyes, and she pushed herself up. We made it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias let out a shaky laugh. Define made it. Where are we? Xylira glanced around, her expression contemplative. We're between, she said. The threshold brought us to its core, a place outside time and space. Elias frowned, his gaze scanning the endless expanse. And how do we get out? Before Xylira could answer, the air around them shifted, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. A figure materialized before them, humanoid in form, but cloaked in shifting light that made it impossible to discern any features. Welcome, travelers, the figure said, its voice resonating with an otherworldly cadence. You have reached the nexus of all paths. Xylira stood, her posture tense. Who are you? The figure tilted its head, the light around it pulsing gently. I am a fragment of the threshold's consciousness, a guardian of its truths. Elias rose to his feet, his heart pounding. What do you want from us? You are not the first to reach this place, the figure said, its tone calm. But few have come with such desperation. You seek answers, do you not? Xylira took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. We seek survival. The harvesters pursue us relentlessly, and the threshold holds the key to stopping them. The figure seemed to study her, its light flickering. The threshold is not a weapon, it said. It is a mirror. It reveals the truth to those who dare to look. What truth? Elias asked, his voice edged with frustration. The figure turned its luminous gaze on him. The truth of who you are, of what you can become. Elias opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat as the ground beneath them began to shift. The light around them coalesced into swirling images, vivid and immersive. He saw Earth, its sprawling cities and vast landscapes bathed in the glow of sunrise. He saw humanity's triumphs and failures, its capacity for creation and destruction. And then he saw himself, his journey, his choices, and the pain he had carried with him. The vision shifted to Xylira's world, a breathtaking realm of golden spires and vibrant skies, now reduced to ash and shadow. He saw her people, proud and resilient, fighting against an unstoppable force. And he saw her, a child standing amidst the ruins, her golden veins dimmed by grief, but glowing with determination. The visions faded, leaving Elias and Xylira standing in silence. "This is what you fight for," the figure said. "Not just survival, but the chance to reclaim what has been lost, to forge a new path." Elias exchanged a glance with Xylira, her expression unreadable. "And how do we do that?" he asked. "The threshold will guide you," the figure said. "But you must choose your path. Will you return to your worlds and face the darkness, or will you remain here safe but stagnant?" Xylira's jaw tightened. "We've come too far to give up now," she said. Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. "We fight." The figure's light flared, and the air around them vibrated with a low hum. "Very well," it said. "The path forward will not be easy, but you have the strength to endure." The ground beneath them began to dissolve, the light around them growing brighter and brighter until it consumed everything. When Elias opened his eyes again, he was lying on cold, hard ground. The faint scent of charred metal and ozone filled the air. He sat up, groaning, and found himself back in the cavern. The altar and portal were gone, replaced by a smooth, unbroken surface. Xylira was beside him, already on her feet and scanning their surroundings. "We're back," she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. Elias pushed himself up, wincing. "What now?" "We find the others," Xylira said. "The threshold didn't just show us the past, it showed us what we need to do." Elias frowned. "And what's that?" Xylira turned to him, her golden eyes blazing. "Unite our worlds. Together, we're stronger than the harvesters. But divided—" She trailed off, her expression grim. Elias nodded slowly, the weight of their mission settling on his shoulders. "Then we'd better get moving." As they made their way out of the cavern, the faint hum of the threshold lingered in Elias's mind, a reminder of the choices they had made and the battles yet to come. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Elias felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced the abyss and emerged stronger, ready to confront whatever lay ahead, and no matter what, they would face it together.